We are faced then with this challenge, and here it is. We must seek to know Yeshua from the pages of Scripture without forcing an ontological template upon them. That would be the Greco approach. We cannot begin by asking the Greek questions of, quote, essence and being, end quote, and then expect to find answers in the Hebraic-oriented text of the Bible. Understand what I mean there? Rather, Hegg says, we must accept the fact that the identity and definition of God and the Messiah He has sent will be known in the Scriptures as we read the work of God and His Messiah. So we know who God is by the work that He has done, in plain language. How do we figure out who God is and what He is, what He's made of, so to say? If we were to ask the historical question, how do we understand God? What is God made of, right? What's the ontological question? How do we investigate God? Who is He and what is He made of? Well, the answers can be found in the Bible's portrayal of not necessarily here's what God is made of, but in the way that the Bible articulates God's actions both in the world and outside of the world. In other words, in the universe, in creation, and things like that. So Hegg goes on to say, or to put it another way, the language of the Bible will be properly understood only when we interpret it within the Hebrew worldview in which it was written. Hegg goes on to say, this approach that the worldview of the Hebrews, it's never going to satisfy the linear logic of the Greek mind, nor will it work to use the categories of linear logic to describe the God of Israel, right? We must be satisfied with knowing and defining God and His Messiah by understanding and appreciating the work of God and what He has and will accomplish through that work. Understand what I mean there? For now, Hegg goes on to say, in the end, the Hebraic worldview has learned to be at home with mystery, right? That's what most Christians will fall back to, is that mystery is the way to appreciate the Scriptures. And there's room for mystery, but we're going to find out that there are limits to that as well, and there are some pitfalls and dangers to simply just affirming mystery all the time. Hegg concludes by saying, while the goal of solving quadratic equations is to discover the value of the unknown element, the goal of knowing God is worship, right? Avodah, right? And avodah, or avoda, however you want to emphasize the word there, avoda in Hebrew is the act of worship, the act of praise, the act of honoring God for who He is and what He has done. And so that's the goal of knowing God, is worshiping God in all of His majesty, not necessary to dissect God, bring Him down to our level, and recreate Him in our own image, and so that we can understand Him. God is high and lofty. Recall the passage from Isaiah that I read earlier. In closing, in the linear logic of mathematics, Hegg says, one fails if one does not discover the value of the unknown element in the equation, right? That's the Greek perspective. If you can't get the answer to the algebraic equation, then you've failed in solving the problem. In the revelation of God to man in the Scriptures and in the Messiah, one fails if one cannot be satisfied with the unknown. That's I think that's what he's describing as the Greek approach again. If after all of our discussions about God, we're still left scratching our heads saying we can't figure God out fully, and yet we're walking away disappointed, well then I believe what Hegg's trying to convey is that we're not appreciating the full scope of what the Bible's trying to convey to us. We must be satisfied even if we don't fully understand God. For though, he goes on to say, this is Hegg, for though we may through the work of God's grace know Him indeed, Hegg affirms that we can never know Him exhaustively. We can't fully know God. Why? Because of what I mentioned earlier in Isaiah 55:8. God's ways are higher than our ways, and His thoughts are above our thoughts. So we are going to have to concede that God is ultimately unknowable in all of His ways, right? Exhaustively, God is ultimately unknowable. The articulation of God's fullness is inexpressible with words. We say that it is ineffable. We can't speak. We can't tell of all of His goodness and His mercy. It's beyond the scope of human language to express the full majesty of God, even though we've been given this revelation in Scripture. Hegg concludes by saying, nor is our limited knowledge of Him able to provide comprehensive explanations of His person and His works. When we reach the end of our ability to know Him, we are left with the mystery of His inexplicable greatness. By faith, we hold the treasure of this mystery in earthen vessels. Recall 2 Corinthians 4, verse 7.